The strangest part of human augmentation is not the hardware, it is the paperwork. Right now, no widely accepted standard says when an augmented person is still the same rights holder. Organizations already make life-changing decisions using rough proxies. They look at capacity, competence, disability status, intent, consent forms, and liability. Those tools work until cognition becomes partly outsourced, or partly restored, or partly rewritten. Start with the core problem. Identity under augmentation is really about operational continuity. Can you still treat the subject as the same institutional person across changes in memory, agency, consent, and responsibility? The frontier is not philosophical poetry. It is deciding when courts, employers, insurers, hospitals, and identity systems must trigger a formal review. Here is the first high-impact finding. Modern medicine can classify cognitive decline with impressive rigor, but it is not designed to answer personhood continuity. Alzheimer's diagnostic criteria, for example, formalized a way to label disease states. That helps standardize care and research. Yet a diagnosis is not a verdict on whether the legal and social subject has changed into someone else. That gap matters more as restoration and assistance improve. Imagine a person who becomes impaired, then regains function through a cognitive prosthetic. Clinically, you might track symptoms. Institutionally, you still need to decide who can sign, who can revoke prior consent, and who carries responsibility for actions taken while assisted. A second finding is more reassuring and more disruptive. Practical personhood is already a socio-technical system. Older adults use everyday technologies to keep living at home. They use them for independence, safety, social connection, and support for care routines. Notice what that implies. The person you recognize day to day is partly composed of their environment. Family members, device settings, care networks, and records help stabilize identity over time. If you remove those supports, you can reduce autonomy without touching biology. If you add supports, you can preserve autonomy even when biology declines. That creates a strategic inversion. Instead of asking, is the brain the same, institutions often act as if the question is the whole support stack stable? A change in a device, or a caregiver, or a data record can change the person's effective agency. Now the third finding. Machine-mediated cognition is already embedded in knowledge work. It sits inside learning systems, scientific computing, document recognition, and content generation workflows. These tools change how people perceive information, remember details, make decisions, and explain outcomes. The unresolved issue is attribution. When human judgment and machine output are tightly coupled, who authored the act? Who is accountable if it harms someone? Those questions become sharper when the system does not just suggest, but executes, or when it shapes mood, attention, and recall. A simple framing helps. Some outputs are tool-assisted acts. The human retains practical control, understands the output, and can accept or reject it. Other outputs are delegated agent acts. The system executes under authority without moment-to-moment human authorship. Then there are contested acts, where the record is too weak to say what happened. Contested acts are not edge cases anymore. They appear when interfaces are persuasive, when models auto-complete decisions, when implants modulate emotion, or when credentials can be hijacked. Without clean attribution, liability becomes a fog. Rights can be denied or wrongly transferred because nobody can prove agency. Here is a fourth finding, and it is the binding constraint. The main limit is coordination, not invention. Medicine, disability systems, employers, insurers, courts, regulators, standards bodies, and care networks lack shared thresholds. They do not agree on when augmentation changes capacity, preference, accountability, or rights access enough to require review. So one person can be treated as fully responsible in a workplace system. The same person can be treated as impaired in a benefits system. In a hospital, they might be treated as needing a proxy. In a court, they might be treated as competent. That fragmentation creates what you can call split personhood, a single human, but multiple incompatible institutional selves. The risk is not just confusion, it is instability at scale. As augmentation becomes common, inconsistent recognition across domains will produce disputes, delays, exclusions, and arbitrage. People will learn to route themselves to the system that grants the most favorable identity classification. Adversaries will do the same, with higher stakes. The fifth finding concerns measurement, because leaders will ask for metrics. The tempting idea is a universal identity fidelity score, a number that settles continuity across implants, drugs, AI agents, and future restoration. That kind of score is not established. and it is not constrained by current evidence. What does exist is the infrastructure for careful, reproducible analysis. Statistical and scientific computing ecosystems already support longitudinal monitoring and evidence synthesis. But governance has to decide which variables can be collected, how long they can be retained, and what they can be linked to. This is where a subtle danger appears. Continuity monitoring can quietly become surveillance. Logs meant to protect an augmented person can be reused to discipline them. Employers can use it for productivity scoring. Insurers can use it for pricing. Platforms can use it for exclusion. Authorities can use it for control. So, the problem becomes two-sided. You need enough instrumentation to detect continuity incidents. At the same time, you need hard barriers that keep continuity records from turning into a behavioral credit file. A workable approach is to treat personhood impact like safety review. Before you procure or deploy high-risk augmentation, you run a personhood impact assessment, not as a moral essay, but as an operational gate. At minimum, the assessment asks what cognitive function is affected. It asks whether the change is reversible. It asks how consent works and how revocation works. It asks what attribution records exist, what data is retained, and what emergency override exists. Then it asks a direct question: what rights could be gained, lost, or conditionally granted because of this system? A separate but related step is language discipline. Policy must distinguish accommodation, therapy, enhancement, and coercive optimization. Accommodation preserves access and participation. Therapy treats clinically recognized impairment. Enhancement claims performance beyond baseline. Coercive optimization links employment, benefits, or standing to adopting augmentation. That last category is where governance often fails quietly. A program can be described as optional, while promotions, schedules, or eligibility tilt heavily toward adopters. Over time, consent becomes a fiction because refusal carries a penalty. Leaders also need incident procedures. When an action is disputed, you need a way to decide whether it was performed by the person, by an interface, by a delegated agent, or by an unauthorized actor. Without that, every serious incident becomes a legitimacy crisis. Finally, you can define continuity protection metrics that are legible to executives. Track identity continuity incident rates per 10,000 active users per year. Track consent revocation latency, the time between revocation and verified cessation or rollback. Track reversion success rates, the fraction of users who can return to an agreed baseline after discontinuation. Track attribution resolution time, how long it takes to settle a contested act. Track cross-system recognition mismatch rates, how often institutions classify the same person inconsistently. None of those metrics solves metaphysics. They do something more practical. They reveal whether your systems preserve agency or slowly erode it. Over the near term, from 2026 to 2050, disputes will cluster around assistive AI, workplace augmentation, cognitive prosthetics, emotional regulation tools, and delegated agents. Those systems arrive before any unified continuity standard exists. By mid-century, revocation, rollback, and cross-system recognition will become design requirements, not ethics electives. The memorable line is simple. If you cannot say who a person is after augmentation, you will not be able to say what they are owed.